Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am your host, Janet Sandberg, and today I am joined by Rachel Coleman. Rachel, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here today.
I am so glad to be here. So thanks for having me.
Good. Why don't you start by just introducing yourself a little bit?
Alrighty. At least on my business cards, it says author, speaker, adventurer. I'm a level 36 human, and I am in the process of writing more books and publishing more books and living life on my terms. So I live in Southwest Virginia, but I was born and raised in Northeast Texas, and that was an interesting time in my life, and I'll get more on that into the story. But I moved to Virginia in 2019, and it's been even more interesting. And so it's just a ride. So yeah.
Good. Yeah, big moves like that are an adventure for sure. I've done some pretty big moves, international moves. And people are kind of two camps, I think, when it comes to big moves. They're either like terrified at the thought of it, or they're like, oh my gosh, what a great adventure. There doesn't really seem to be any middle ground on that.
I absolutely agree. I'm a wanderer, so I've been in Virginia 5 years, and now I'm getting stir crazy. It's like,
Mhm.
where do I head next?
Time to go. All right. Well, you alluded to some stuff. So why don't we go back there and talk about the reason that you're here on this podcast? What was happening? Where were you? What was going on when you thought that you maybe didn't want to be here anymore?
So, suicidal ideation has been something in my life since I was a kid, which was really hard on my parents. Bless them, they did their best. But having a suicidal, you know, 8-year-old or 10-year-old is a lot to handle.
Yeah.
And so starting there in my childhood, so I also have sickle cell SC, and that causes sickling of the blood. The blood cells don't come out right, and that can cause immense pain and all sorts of other complications, up to and including death in and of itself. Like the sickle blood
Yeah.
caught somewhere and caused lots of complications. So growing up, I was a very sickly child, and that caused lots of doctor's visits, lots of hospital visits, and cost a lot of money. So I felt bad. We were not wealthy by any means, and so growing up, I felt like I was a financial burden on my family, and I also didn't want to be in pain anymore. Just the physical pain of dealing with the sickle cell complications. On top of that, I grew up in a very conservative Christian space, and I knew by first grade I was not straight. When I had a crush on another little girl in the first grade, and I was just like, oh no, oh, because the church that we were under was very homophobic and very anti-LGBT community. And so I had all of these things, and I felt like I was an abomination and I was a burden on my family,
Yeah.
and I would just be better off dead, because at that point, at least the only more money I would cost my family would be my funeral expenses. And then I would stop costing the money and stop being a burden.
That is so heavy for a little kid. My God.
It is, and that's kind of when I started writing. I wasn't great with my speech. I had a speech impediment, and so I would write in order to try to articulate myself better. And I wrote these thoughts out in my diary, which my mom found and
Oh,
did not react positively to, because she was under a lot of stress. My parents were divorced. She was struggling financially, and she just didn't have the training and background to deal with a undiagnosed neurospicy child who was also having these depressive episodes and suicidal thoughts.
wow.
So that didn't go well for anybody involved. And later on, I made multiple attempts over the course of my youth and teenage. Obviously, they all failed. I tried to hang myself. I tried to drown myself, which is especially ironic because I have a fear of drowning by accident. And there I was trying to do it on purpose. So, yeah, at one point in high school, I was sexually assaulted, and I slept with a box cutter under my pillow in case I didn't want to live with it. I figured if I cut myself at the end of the night after everyone went to bed, no one would find my body till morning, and I would have bled out, and there was nothing that they could do. And my mom found that box cutter at some point and took it
Mm.
away, but she didn't say anything. Like, we just never talked about it. And I ended up going to a therapist shortly thereafter, and bless him, it was not a good match. And I told him about what was going on in my life and being sexually assaulted. And he said, looked me dead in my face and said, "Well, it could have been worse. It's not that bad." And I'm like,
What
"Excuse you?"
exactly could be worse? Like all the things you have just stacked up there is like each one unto themselves is horrible. Like which part could be worse? No, sir. I disagree.
So I discontinued seeing that
Good
therapist.
for you.
But unfortunately, I didn't get the therapy that I needed. So I just tumbled into abusive relationships. And finally, after 4 years of just increasingly sexually and physically abusive relationships, I ran off to the military. That did not pan out.
Fix all the
I
problems.
was going to fix everything. It fixed no problems at all. And I separated about 6 months later. But that was an honorable separation. But I was just like very thankful to get. It was not for me. And I knew that by the time the ink was dry on the paperwork, I was like, I have made a mistake. So I came back and I moved back in with my parents, and there was some static there. So I finally managed to get a job. I moved out. I moved in with my boyfriend at the time, and we got married a year later. And another one of those, as soon as the ink was dry, I was like, this was a bad decision. As
Mm,
much as I loved and cared for him, I knew that we were not compatible at the marriage level.
right.
But I was stubborn, and people were like, "Oh, you should get an annulment, or it's not going to work." Blah blah blah. And I was like, "I'll show you." So we stayed together for 7 years.
Okay.
That was well. We did not have any children, so that helped a lot. And we were friends. Like, we make great friends. We're still friends to this day. We were just bad life partners. Like, he's gotten remarried to a wonderful person I absolutely love. I'm so happy for them. And he and I still chat almost on the
Good.
daily. So I just wish I had made that decision sooner, because I did initiate the divorce like after several years. It was 2017, and I had just, like, my job was going poorly. We were almost bankrupt, he and I, um, and I just couldn't take it anymore. And so I was sitting there with him and his brother and his mom, and I was like, I have to get out of this house. I have to leave. It was hunting season. It was hunting season. I was like, this house is full of loaded guns. I have to leave right now, or
Mm,
I am not going to survive the night. But even beyond that, so I left. But I had no intention of making it home that night. I was like, how can I make this look like an accident so that the insurance pays out and he never has to work a day in his life if he chooses not to? Even in that moment, I was like, how can I take care of you?
yeah.
Uh, And at the time, there was a song by Logic. It was the title of the song was just the suicide hotline number. And as I was like on the road speeding, I'd come up with the plan in my head to just like crash my car, try to make it look like my car ran off the road and just crash it. So hopefully it would look like an accident. As I was driving, this song came on by Logic, and I was just like, okay, all right, all right. I'm gonna take my butt to the house. And then I took my butt to the house and I just boohoo cried. I just boohoo cried, and I was like, something's got to give. And so I left my job, and um, a few months later, I ended up like taking basically a sabbatical, went and visited some friends, did some traveling, and came back. And I was just like, we can go to marriage counseling and try it a little bit, but I need out of this. I need out of this town that I'm in. I need out of this relationship. It is literally going to kill me. So we did the marriage counseling thing a little bit, and that didn't work because we didn't work as a partnership.
Yeah.
So in 2019, we got divorced, and a few months later, I got a job offer in Virginia. So I was just like, this is a great time to make a move and see what's next in life. But I moved to Virginia just in time for 2020.
Right.
Yes, and I was still very emotionally vulnerable, so I ended up getting into a toxic circle and just toxic situations, and then when we got all sent home, I was in my apartment by myself, day drinking.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, and just looking at my life that was, in my eyes, in flames. It really wasn't that bad. Like I had a stable job, I was making good money, but I was just like, oh, I've ruined everything. Everything's so bad, and I was so lonely. And I felt that because I had relationships and they were also toxic. And I was just like, how at my big age did I fall for this same nonsense again? So I did manage to get I got into a therapist and she was really helpful, but it was just a lot. So at the end of 2020, a week before my birthday, checked myself into a mental health hospital. Took a grippy sock vacation because I was sitting alone in my apartment and I was like, I can't be alone right now. And so I reached out to a couple of my friends who were like physically close, but it's one of those things. People are often like, "Oh, if they had just asked for help or if they had just, reached out, I would have been there." I didn't tell them, "Hey, I'm thinking of offing myself. Could you roll up?" What I said was I text them both and I said, "Hey, what are you up to?" Because even in that moment, I didn't want to burden anyone, especially with my
Hmm.
like trauma and my pain. And they're both like, "Oh, I'm doing this, that, and the third. What do you need?" "Nothing. I'm good. Have a great night." And that was that. And then because I was used to going to the hospital, I packed an overnight bag because I was like, they cannot send me home. They cannot just throw some pills at me and send me home because I cannot be trusted by myself. So I went to the emergency room. They followed standard procedure. I had like a telehealth visit basically with the psychiatrist who was just like, "Yes, you have said all of the buzzwords. We are going to check you into a hospital." And so I feel like I genuinely lucked out. I went to a very good mental health facility. And the funny what I find funny is the food was delicious. For hospital food, yes. The thing about it was is because it was a mental health facility, so they didn't have to follow the same dietary restrictions that a main hospital would when they're feeding
Right.
people who have more physical ailments. So a lot
They
of
don't have
that
to do the
hospital
low
food.
salts and the low fat,
Yes,
all of that. Yeah.
exactly. And so I spent 5 or 6 days there, and I was kind of in the middle. There were some younger people there in their teens, and then there were some older people there in their like 40s and 50s. Some were voluntary, like myself, and some were their family had taken them or a friend had brought them in for help. And it was very interesting the different stories and lives that were there. And so there were different therapies. We had like music and they let us go to the gym. For me, it was a very quality experience. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people have not had that experience, especially with mental facilities. There have been a lot of bad situations. So I'm extremely grateful that I got a good hospital, that there was a bed open because it was also a hot cot situation. Pretty much as soon as somebody left, they had another person in there, sometimes
Right.
within 30 minutes because there was just a great need, which is really
Hmm.
unfortunate. But there
Especially
isn't,
during COVID. Yeah.
yes, 100%. And so there they put me on an antidepressant and it was like a whole new day. I was just like, oh, I
Right.
can take on the world. This is great. And of course they gave us like therapy tools and things, and we also had like a team of people. So we had like physical like our medical doctors, and then they also contacted like the therapist that I was speaking with, and so they wanted to like coordinate care to make sure you were taken care of. And so I also had a social worker, and at the end my social worker said, "I'm worried about you on the outside." And I was like, "Oh, no, no, it's fine, it's fine. I'll be good. I got my medication. It's great." She was absolutely right because nothing on the outside had changed, right? I went right back
Sure.
into a toxic environment. And like 24 hours later, I was like, "Oh no, I have made a mistake," because I was still in the same toxic bubble, very isolated, very alone. And I was like, oh dear, Houston, we have a problem. But thankfully, I had a better support structure um, there. So I was able to leave some of the toxic communities that I had gotten into
Good.
and lean heavily on therapy and the medication. But then the medication stopped working as well. For me, I can't remember what they put me on first, but it went from that high, I'm like, great, everything's good, to it plateaued at an apathy. And I didn't care what happened. I didn't want to
Mm,
die, but I didn't want to live either. Like, I didn't care if
right.
I lost my job, and I didn't care about doing the work. I didn't care about, my friends and my loved ones. They were just people who existed. And I was just like, uh oh, Houston, we have another problem. So I changed my medication, I left my job, and then I moved. And that was a big thing because in COVID, they started asking people, do you feel safe at home? Because that was a big issue. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until I moved that, and I went to the doctor's office and I answered that question, I said yes, that I meant it. So we are now in mid 2021. And I
Okay.
was just like, oh, because I finally felt safe because I had been sexually assaulted in my own bed multiple times over the course of my lifetime. And I was in a place where I was like, only I have the keys to this place. And all of the people who have previously done me harm don't know my address. And so that was very, like, that was weight off my shoulders. And then I just continued, but I got another job and it was the single most toxic workplace I have ever had in my entire life. And this is coming from someone who has at times been on 3 different payrolls. And so I told my therapist within the first month I was there, I was like, I feel like I've been hired as a scapegoat.
Oh no.
Yes, and that is what I feel was exactly what happened. And so I had put in like a 6 month notice when things had gotten bad, and then they went from bad to worse. So I left effective immediately.
Okay.
And so now we're at 2022, and I just spiraled into a super deep depression. So I've got this house, and now I don't have this job. And it was a very high level, good paying job. And I'm like, what do I do? I was terrified to apply for jobs. I was having anxiety attacks just looking at my resume or trying to go on Indeed because I was like, what are these
Yeah.
people going to say? What if they like launch a smear campaign against me? I don't know what to do. And then I could no longer pay the mortgage on the house that I had bought with the previous job money.
Right.
So I started spiraling, and I was able to like keep things afloat. The mortgage company worked with me and gave me like a forbearance type situation. And then I was able to get there was still some COVID money to help with keeping you in your
Yep.
home.
Yep.
So I was able to acquire some of that to pay the back mortgage. But it was in December of 2022. I was just sitting alone in this big old house because I had bought with all these grandiose plans. I would like the time I was like, it's going to be filled with love and laughter, and then there I was sitting in the dark in an empty house.
Mm.
Um, and I was just sitting on the floor, even though I was like on medication and therapy and everything. I was just sitting on the floor, like I don't want to see tomorrow. Don't. And in that moment, I was like, I did everything that I was told to do, right? Like, I was told to get married. I was told to, get a degree. I was told to, live the American dream, the picket fence and stuff like that. Like, I didn't mention, like, to some of my family members that, like, my family didn't know they miscarried. Like, they're like, why don't you have children? Disrespectfully, leave it alone. And so I had gotten divorced and I was in this big old house that I could no longer afford. And I'd climbed the corporate ladder and basically fallen off of it. And I was like, I don't want to see tomorrow. I did everything that I was supposed to do and I'm miserable. So I sat there boohoo crying for an unknown amount of time. And then finally a little voice in my head said, have you tried living your own life? And it's like I can't take my life before I live it first. So how about I do the
Oh my
things that
gosh.
I want to do? And
Yes.
so I started writing a list and of just I went back as far as I could in my memory to my childhood. What was all of the things that I have wanted to do that have stuck with me over the years that I either have done and enjoyed and haven't done in a long time, or always wanted to try and haven't done yet for
Hmm.
whatever reason. And so I started making this list and I got to like 30 something things. And I was just like, oh, well, why don't I make it 50? It's a nice round number. And then I got a few more things and I was like, I can't think of 50 things. So I stopped at 42. And if you're a Douglas Adams fan, you
Yeah.
may be familiar with the number 42, the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Yes.
So I wrote
I
42
love
things
that.
and I started doing it. So well, the first thing I did was I went back to my doctor, I went back to my therapist, and I was like, we've got to change my medication. First off, I need something different. This one's not good enough. And like I got back into therapy. We worked on changing my medications. And it's been a shuffle. Excuse me. It's not a magic bullet. There's trial and error to it. And as your body adjusts, you can need to change medications. But I wholeheartedly, I will shake my pill bottles in the air like maracas. I am so grateful for that and how much it helps me with my life. And I did that. So I started doing things. And the first thing that I did was try aerial. So I always loved Cirque du Soleil and I
Mhm.
always wanted to try aerial arts. So I found a studio in town and they had a Groupon. Yes.
Amazing.
They had a Groupon, and so I stayed together enough to get this Groupon for this aerial art studio. And I went to class. I mustered the courage to go to class, and I fell in love with it. So I tried aerial silks and lyra or aerial hoop, and I
Mhm.
absolutely loved it. And I was like, that gave me that spark that I needed. And what I encourage people is to find a spark, something that is not a person that is worth
Mhm.
holding on to and being there tomorrow for and clinging to that spark while you get the other help you need, while you get therapy, while you get medication. It's just like it's like that handhold, if you will, like when you're hanging on a cliff.
Yeah. Yeah. Something to look forward to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I'm still, one of the things on my list was to publish a book. So I ended up turning the list of 42 things into a book. I
Good.
made it, yes, I made it a little bit more accessible to a broader audience. And I turned it into the book, 42 Things to Do Before You Go, Finding a Reason to Stay. And so
I love
that is
that.
available on all of the favorite platforms, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you get your books from. And I've just been learning about that, but that was over the course of a year. So I took about 6 months to write the book, and then I was terrified to do anything with it.
Yes.
Yes, but I fell into a bunch of local authors by happenstance. I met the leader of a local writers group through Facebook. I was selling because I ended up selling my house and I was selling furniture and he bought a couch from me. And so we just started chit chatting. And so he was like, hey, I'm a published author. I've got awards. I'm a journalist, da 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 da. He wasn't like bragging or anything, but it just came up in conversation. He's like, let me read it. I was just like, oh,
Wow.
okay, I guess I can let somebody see it, I guess. And he gave me some really positive feedback.
Amazing.
And he was like, I will pass this along to my publishing company. And they did like it, but I got impatient before so I sent them a few pages and they were like, we like it, send us the rest. And then it took too long for them to respond. So
Hmm.
I was like, I want to get this out here, especially by the holiday season,
Yeah.
because that can be a hard time for a lot of people. And we do lose a lot of people during the holidays, and I've
We do.
absolutely lost friends and family to suicide. So I ended up going the self-publishing route. I got an editor who was referred from someone that I respected, but me and the editor did not mesh well. And
Mhm.
I did learn some valuable lessons one of and I grew as a person. One of the things, she gave me a scathing review on my book and she said something to the effect of, it reads like a BuzzFeed article and it wouldn't be worth the money you would have to charge for it to make up your publishing costs. That was like, ugh, right to the heart.
Yeah.
And so I sat on my book for another month and was just like, I'm gonna just bury this in the sand. But then I went to a big author conference and got a lot of positive, encouragement from that as well. And so finally I went the self-publishing route and made it available, and that was a lot, but it came out in December of last year, so it's like 10 months old now. So it went really well. So it became a number 1 new release on Amazon, which was
Amazing.
wild, especially considering my um my noviceness in marketing.
Mhm.
But I had a lot of support, and just people that I've talked to have been super supportive. My goal is to just help people. And so it's just become kind of a thing of its own, is taking life. One of the things that I found though was people were reading the book and being like, "Oh, that's nice," and then not taking action. So I'm
Uh-huh.
like, "No, but you got to do the things, like even
Actually
make
do the things.
yes, or even make up your own things
Yeah.
and do them." So I've started to facilitate different events and like groups to help people do stuff or find things in their community and do them, because it's about finding your thing that
Yeah.
makes you want to stay here.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love that. So cool. I'm very much in line actually with my last guest who did, ended up with a list sort of the same way. But yeah, it's all about I'm trying to create that life that we want to live, that we enjoy living, that we have something to look forward to. And it's not just about, getting a job so that we can make money so that we can buy the house and
Absolutely.
whatever.
We were not put here to just pay bills and die.
No, no, we weren't. We are meant to enjoy life and people and I think it's also, when we have that list and we do a thing, we also get that little feeling of accomplishment or productivity or something, which feeds those good things in our brain, those feel good chemicals. We're like, I did a thing.
Yes, and like there are 3 main tenets of the things, which is reconnecting with yourself, your community, and nature, because
Mhm.
having a support structure is important, getting out into nature is important, and also figuring out who you are in and of yourself without the input of other people telling you who or what you should be. Because at the end of the day, we are the ones who have to live and die with the life that we live. When I was on
Mhm.
that floor in the house, nobody was there. None of the people who were like, "Oh, you should get married or you should do this," or like, they weren't there sitting on the floor bankrupt and crying. I was.
Exactly. Exactly. So, how are you doing now with relationships?
So I am doing a lot better. I have a lovely boyfriend, and I've just got a small manageable place, and making I work to make intentional connections and intentional positive connections. So I look for friends and networking groups and just getting out there and being with people who add to my cup.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love that. And health-wise, how's it going with the sickle cell?
So that is a
That's
genetic
something that never goes away, right?
it is a genetic disorder, and I will have that for my life. But if there are so many more treatments available now, like it's a gene that can be edited. So like CRISPR treatments are available
Yeah.
now, and the research has come along so way. Part of the reason I'm alive on that front is because I was born at a time like born right in step with growing research. So there was always something new, something available that could keep me alive a little bit longer. Because when I was born in the 80s, the doctors didn't expect me to see kindergarten. And
Oh
then I
my
made it to
gosh.
kindergarten, and they didn't expect me to see high school. And then once I made it there, they're like, if you get to 21, you're pretty much okay until you get to your 50s. And so now I'm like, I'm gonna meet 81-year-old woman breaking Guinness World Records like this lady I saw on Instagram the other day. Like that's the life that I
Amazing.
want. So I focus on trying to eat regularly and nutritiously, but there's room for pizza,
Yeah,
there's vegetables involved, but
absolutely.
living a good life, living an active life, very much live well, laugh a lot, love a lot
I
philosophy.
love it. Good. Because yeah, like you started at such a huge disadvantage on so many fronts. So, sometimes we're just like, wow, yeah, no wonder you had suicidal ideation. You were behind the eight ball from day one. Um, but it's amazing between, the medical advances, also the advances with antidepressants and those sorts of drugs have come such a long way over the last decade even. We do have medical technology to thank
Mhm.
for some things. Yeah, just deciding to live life on purpose and to do what makes us feel good. And yeah, just keep doing the things and finding things to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. And suicidal ideation may be something that never goes away from me, but rock bottom is a lot higher than it used to be.
Yes, yes. I love that. I love that. What advice would you give to somebody who was struggling right now?
Find a thing that gives you even an out, like a half smirk worth of positive. And I say a thing, even though like my book is dedicated to my two best friends, don't tie yourself to a person, because what happens when something happens to that person? And so that could be rough for a lot of people. So find something that brings you a modicum of joy or positivity. Like joy may be too far of a reach, especially if you're in the hole. It's like the bit in the Harry Potter book. It's not a positive thought, so they couldn't take it away from me. Like it was an obsession. So maybe not like a full obsession, but even just something to hang on to that is worth getting up tomorrow, right? That is worth, I like this enough to be here tomorrow to see it or to do it or to experience it. And this is enough to be like, okay, I need some help so that I can have this thing. And hopefully ideally it's a positive thing, right? We don't necessarily want the next vice. We're not trying to
Correct.
chase that. We're not trying to chase that rabbit, but find a positive thing. And it doesn't like it's your life. It can be your thing. It doesn't have to be anything typical. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody else. Maybe.
Exactly.
So just find your thing.
Yeah. My husband, we're in our 50s now, and he still plays Dungeons and Dragons every Friday night with his friends because that's his thing. He's been playing with the same group of people now for, I don't know, probably close to 10 years. And, every Friday night, occasionally things come up that they can't play, but it's his thing. And, he doesn't have to explain that he likes playing this game with his friends. It's just, and he notices when, there were times throughout his lifetime, he's been playing this since he was a kid, obviously, but times when life gets busy and, he had kids and they were little and you just can't afford to sit down and play with your friends for 4 hours on a Friday night. So he couldn't. And, he didn't do as well during those years. And it really is that one thing that he looks forward to every week is just, it's kind of a silly game, but it's also really important. And so, yeah, don't worry what anybody else says. Just find your thing, whatever it is. And if it can be done with other people, even better, because that gives us, like you said, that community that we all really need.
And then be open to receiving help. Like find your thing and then be open to receiving help. You're not a burden. People are out there, they
No.
want to help you genuinely. They're like
Yeah.
chomping at the bits. Like I know in my heart of hearts, if I had told my friends the realness, they would have been right there beating down my door. But
Mhm.
I was like, oh, I'm a burden, this, that, and the third. I can't put them out like that. Absolutely not. Your friends don't think that. And
They do
people who
not
do
know.
think that aren't your friends.
Correct. Correct. And yeah, that's one of the things about our depressive thinking is that we think that we're a burden to everybody else and that nobody else has ever felt this way. You know, It's all untrue. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and your wisdom with us. I appreciate you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.